people out, where you evacuate, and then there are other terrorists waiting to receive them.
We've certainly seen terrorists target transportation hubs before. I think sort of the most recent was in London, in the Tube. 22 people killed there with what they called a bucket bomb. But you know, not too long ago, it wasn't a bomb, but just in October, we had a truck ram cyclists along a bike path here in New York City. Sometimes once one incident happens, it's followed by another, whether people are inspired by what they see or something along those lines. Do you expect that this is a period where the city of New York is going to be sort of on heightened alert, not just today, but I mean, at least throughout the rest of the holiday season?
Well, yes, we have to be. I mean, my biggest question is what I think about this is, are we importing these terrorists, or are they homegrown, meaning self-radicalized, and becoming so on the internet? And that is what the terrorists want to achieve. They don't want to have to send terrorists across borders, you know, language barriers. They would much prefer they be self-radicalized here, and then it multiplies. So these are the questions that are going to be hopefully learned by the post-interview of these terrorists. You know, I, for one, think they're enemy combatants. You know, the fact that they read their Miranda rights makes it tough, because then they don't communicate. The second many of them, you know, some of them will give their agenda. Others, once they read the Miranda, they clam up.
Let's talk about this dilemma of the self-radicalized terrorist. How difficult is it to catch this person before they spring into action, before they start buying pipes from their local hardware store or renting a truck and ramming it into people? I mean, these are people essentially that could be sitting in their basement for hours on end watching a video and getting up and going to work, you know, with people sort of on the job with them, not realizing what's happening.
Well, think about this. It wasn't too long ago that we learned a man had 3 women locked up in his home for about 10 years. Right.
I remember that story.
Remember
of course.
that?
Yes.
10 years. Neighbors, friends, family. Nobody knew.
Yeah.
Nobody knew. Where you hear these horrible atrocities, you know, the Sandusky, you know, and the wife, you know, oh, I didn't know. So think about this. If you have a terrorist going through their everyday life and just piecemealing. Now, unless they telegraph their punch and they start, what do I mean by that is, like, whether they're telling friends and neighbors, you know, and there's a definite shift in their personality, it is virtually impossible to know. You know, as we've seen in California, where a husband gets his wife initiated, and then they send the wife overseas out of the country, and then they do terrorist damage. You know, sometimes they'll pull close people to them, and they do it as a team. So it's very, very tough. And it's incumbent upon everyone, you know, just to keep an eye. You know what? Being a little nosy isn't the worst thing in the world. That's what I say when I give lectures. Being a little nosy with your neighbors, you know, other than, you know, what time they come home from partying, you know, if there's ill intent, it's worth to document.
Yeah, you know, Bill, I take the Amtrak train in every single day into Penn Station, and I hear that refrain, if you see something, say something. It's blasted over the speakers regularly every hour, and it really is something that we should know, not only off by heart, but should be comfortable acting upon. Bill, I want you to stand by. Paul Violas, the CBSN security analyst. You're on the phone with us as well. So, Paul, we're looking at Port Authority. This is an open building where thousands of people come in and out on a regular basis. Is there any way to truly protect this building from what looks like a possibility of a pipe bomb or some other explosive? I mean, it's a building that's meant to be open to the public pretty much 24 hours a day.
Yeah, well, at the end of the day, Anne-Marie, the issue here is that, yes, short answer, there are measures that can and probably will be implemented with respect to hardening outer and inner perimeters and increasing security checks. We know this is not a surprise to law enforcement authorities in the city or in the federal government. ISIS has been talking about for at least a year now, about focusing vulnerabilities on rail systems. So this is not a surprise. The thing that our viewers really need to understand at this point is to remain calm, that this individual is in fact contained, and multiple forces, including the New York City Police Department, the JTTF, which is the Joint Terrorism Task Force, the FBI, probably alcohol, tobacco, and firearms, are working as we speak, using in unison intelligence forces and identifying this individual, and the investigation into him will continue expeditiously. So that it is contained at this point. I think that's the thing we need to understand. The second part is that, Imran, you and I have talked about this multiple times over the years. This is something that we face in our society. We understand that. And in this particular case, we're going to have to embrace the need to enhance levels of security at train stations like a Port Authority, as we have at airports. And it's just something we're going to have to embrace.
Yeah, we have talked about this before, Paul, and I talk about, traveling outside of the country, and particularly prior to the September 11th attacks, there was definitely a clear difference between security maybe in some European countries versus what we experienced in America. Since then, things have changed quite a bit. We never used to see, armed officers in airports, and not in the U.S. You'd see it somewhere else. So, Bill, Paul said this does not come as a complete surprise. ISIS puts out warnings all the time. Bill, is this the new norm?
Every time something like this happens, we always have this same conversation, and I agree and disagree with Paul. Yes, we can harden our locations, our areas of transportation and public areas, but it will always be porous. As long as it's called a public area, you will always have vulnerabilities to get in, and there is always the balance of the cost-benefit of you could make that target so hard, no one could travel. Think about the worst day going to the airport, right, where during the holidays with the longest lines. Think about how busy the Port Authority is at its optimum when there's, moving at its best. So now if we were to put up, magnetometers, enhanced undercover and overt officers, canine, impeding pedestrian traffic, impeding commerce, then it becomes to the point of no one could travel. It would be 1-to-1. So there is a balance, and it is a tough equation, and an equation we don't have the answer to. There is a knee-jerk reaction. So this is the battle that we fight. And the ultimate battle is stopping the terrorists before it gets to this point. Because once they're in, it's like a cancer. It's already too late. Can they get into the Port Authority? Can you get into the airports? The answer is yes. They've done penetration tests. It's called red teaming, with the airports, with the TSA. And they fail abysmally. There's an abysmal failure rate. I mean, I believe it's in the 90 percentile. I think Paul would know better than I. Yeah. So a lot of it is, unfortunately, window dressing. Where we really do well with the Joint Terrorism Task Force, in my opinion, is the intelligence, rooting these folks out. And the most that can be benefited from is the pedestrian, the John Q. Public, giving information, especially within the Islamic communities that are now hopefully more and more cooperating when they feel someone is becoming radicalized.
Yeah, we've talked a lot about this, Paul, that we are kind of our own best defense, that, you can have as many officers or agents in and around the place, but it's the regular people, it's the people within the Islamic community that really sort of make a difference. Bill, you talked about the TSA workers, and I just sort of quickly brought up the results of that test. The report came out in June, I believe, and or maybe it was actually a couple years ago, in June a couple years ago, and it was 67 out of 70 tests TSA agents failed to stop banned items from going through their checkpoints, which is really super scary. So, Paul, what do you make of what Bill has to say? Are we sort of the best protectors here? The best line of defense?
At the end of the day, Anne-Marie, there's going to be, as there always has been and as there always will be, there's a combination of a variety of different sources that we as citizens in this country will need to embrace in order to enhance and to enhance security. Clearly, the American public is going to need to change our cultural awareness as it relates to security and what we report and when we report it. The second part of that is which we tend to be reactive in this case, when we see things that happen such as this, then we're going to start to look at hardening those particular venues. So that's part of that as well. No, I agree with Bill. There's never going to be a silver bullet that you're going to be able to place a blanket of protection over any venue. That's just never going to happen. But we can't live life that way. We can't look at things that way. It's too gloomy. We need to be more positive, and we need to really look at things for how they really are. Everything based with respect to Al-Qaeda, it's called negative migration. Negative behavior migrates to the path of least resistance. So they're going to continue to look at where we're vulnerable. Our intelligence sources are going to continue to do their best to intercept source intelligence and use that in order to preemptively protect the American people. But a big part about this, and I'll go back to what your initial question was as well, is a big part about this is changing really our cultural awareness, re-engineering our cultural thinking in the United States with respect to security. Freedom is fragile, Anne-Marie, and it requires protecting. And that protection is going to really require the implementation and the participation of the American people if we're going to get this right.
In regards to this specific incident, that Port Authority is still shut down. It has been evacuated. What we know now is earlier today, a pipe bomb exploded within the building, possibly in one of the tunnels. Source tells CBS News that one person is in custody and one person may have been injured. The nature of those injuries, the severity of those injuries is unknown. We have been told by WCBS, our local CBS station here, they're reporting that lines are bypassing the Port Authority stop. So there's still, this is subway lines, so they're still sort of going through, but they're bypassing the stop. I imagine that buses are not stopping there either. This is a huge, the main bus depot in the city. Paul, when you hear that the what could be the weapon of choice here is possibly a pipe bomb, what comes to mind for you?
Well, yeah, again, this goes back to the genesis of the conversation with respect to what the mens rea or the intent is at the variety of these things. And what it speaks to me is somewhat of an education. And we won't really know that, Anne-Marie, until we identify the type of ordnance that was used. Once we validate what the vest was that he was wearing and whether that contained an ordnance and whether that ordnance was detonated or whether it wasn't. So there's too much information for us right now to really be able to say what our line of thinking should be. Initially, when we look at this, clearly it's going to speak to whether it was someone that's a part of a cell located, in the Northeast or somewhere in the United States. It's hard to tell.
Right.
What it does tell us, though, is that the individual was in fact educated, and it could have been direct education, it could have been educated overseas, it could have been here, it could have been over the internet. But this person was educated and was inspired. We just don't know if they were led.
What is the threat situation now? I'll ask you, Bill, and maybe also Paul afterwards. Bill, we talked about heading into the holiday season. Is there a heightened concern now for the big cities in America? Do we know of any particular threats, or is there sort of always a general sort of blanket threat that's out there?
Well, I don't have any specific information. I don't have access to anything like that. But our intelligence communities, I'm sure, they know of the chatter, if there is any. But overall, to your point, both the private and public sector, it's incumbent to be of a heightened awareness. When I speak, I tell people to be prepared, not scared. When Paul speaks of a cultural shift, it is a battle within our own culture. When you walk out, if you were to walk out your door of where you're working right now, I guarantee you 8 out of 10 people have their head, what I call in their not-so-smartphone. As long as we're wearing these huge headphones with our heads in our phones, not being aware, not having our head on a swivel, no situational awareness, we are literally like sheep. And it's incumbent upon us to become that lion, to have our head on a swivel, looking around and understanding that harm could come to us. The good and the bad of it is this. NYPD and the first responders of this city in particular, have done a phenomenal job of keeping us safe. Bill Bratton and the ensuing police commissioners have done a phenomenal job through education and implementation of fighting crime. There's become a lull, in my opinion, a false sense of security that we're virtually invulnerable. That is not the case. Every person, I can guarantee you, that's ever been a victim never woke up thinking they were going to be that victim. So what we need to do is to be aware, to look around, and to use that phone for good, meaning if you see someone suspicious, you may want to taking a picture. You may want to consider calling 911 or becoming that part of the system, the culture, the society where you can go proactive and prevent something from happening.
I just want to let everyone know that we have learned that the president has been briefed on this situation. It looks like, Paul, both of you, both Bill and you, are suggesting a cultural shift. You're saying we just have to get used to the idea that we're living in times that requires a higher level of security, that your freedom of movement, the way that you're used to, it might have to be adjusted a little. And Bill is saying, and I'm sure you'd agree with Bill, that we all have to think of ourselves as part of this security force.
Yeah, there's no question about it. You know, at the end of the day, Anne-Marie, we need to understand that there's a gross disparity between how we as Americans handle security and our sense of freedom and our sense of freedom of movement and those of, let's just say, our colleagues in the United Kingdom. And to give you a very blatant example, if you were to go shopping in a department store in London and someone were to leave a backpack down, security would evacuate the store. It's just how they're accustomed to doing it. Here, either someone would steal it or they'd pick it up and bring it to the person. So, it's just a matter of how we look at that. It's just the way it is. We're going to have to accept the fact that we are in the embryonic stage of a holy war, and that war is being brought to American soil. And I don't mean to sound like an alarmist because it's just not my intention, but it's a fact. And with that comes a sense of responsibility, not just from state and local government and federal government, but from all of us, our 321 million Americans, that we need to ratchet up a little bit our game with respect to identification, reporting, and communication. There's no question it's something we're going to have to embrace.
Some very sobering words, Paul. Paul, Bill, I want you to stand by. We have Brooke Silva Braga. He is at the scene right now. Brooke, what can you tell us? What's going on there?
Good morning, Anne-Marie. At the risk of repeating some of what you've been reporting, the call came in to first responders at 7:19 a.m. of an explosion. We now understand it was a pipe bomb, and the NYPD tells us so far one injured person and one suspect in custody. That suspect in custody had another device, they say. As you've pointed out, the Port Authority is one of, if not the main travel hub in Manhattan, and so now we have this massive travel disruption. Subways either diverted from the 42nd Street stations. Most lines through New York come through this area, and then there are also buses. This is the main point where New Jersey Transit buses come in, and we have seen still a few buses mainly exiting, but a few arriving, most with not in service emblazoned on the bus. When we arrived at 8 a.m., about 40 minutes after the time of the explosion, there was just a sea of people moving north up 9th Avenue. The Port Authority is a massive complex that spans a full city block wide from 8th to 9th Avenue and 2 city blocks north from 40th to 42nd. We're here at 9th and 41st, and when we arrived, as I say, at 8, there were hundreds, thousands of people exiting, but no one allowed in. That has turned to a trickle. In fact, at this point, I see no one exiting the building. So presumably whatever buses from New Jersey or subways that were still making it to 42nd, depositing thousands of commuters, have now stopped, and the Port Authority appears to be shut down.
All right, Brooke, thank you very much for the update. I know you're going to be reporting down there. Maybe we'll catch up with you a little bit later. I want to thank you for that. And I just want to sort of underline for the audience that at this point we know very little about this. We know what Brooke confirmed with police, that a pipe bomb was used, that someone is in custody, and as Brooke told us, that person had another device on them. One person has been injured. But the nature of this, whether or not it was a deliberate attack, the motivation behind it, we know nothing at this point. We don't know if this was a terrorist attack or if it was something entirely accidental. So let's just sort of all keep that in mind, certainly in light of recent attacks that have happened, first here in New York with an individual killing 8 people by running over them in a car, actually not too far from Port Authority, in a truck rather. The idea of terrorism is certainly on our minds. We have seen subway systems, transportation systems be attacked before by terrorists, and certainly in London, the Underground, the Tube, was attacked in September with a bomb explosion there, and 22 people were killed. So we're keeping all of this stuff in mind. Paul, I'm going to ask you a question that I asked Bill. In terms of the investigation and where we're going from here, what's happening on the ground and what's the next step?
First step is that the amount of collaboration that's been trained and rehearsed over and over again is being put into effect. It already is in effect. And I mean, New York City Police Department, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, FBI, ATF will all work together in unison and work with respect to the crime scene and the individual, the investigation on the individual. Search warrants will be requested so they can go after the individual's home, car, devices. Part of that investigation will immediately entail taking a look into who the individual is, who he's communicated with, who he's sending text messages to, et cetera, how well this was planned, if he had been working with anybody or in conjunction with anybody for this particular event. And then you're going to have the technology side, the artificial intelligence side, where you've got the Real-Time Crime Center in New York that's going to be looking now forensically at where this individual came up on camera, was he with anybody else, was he in a car, what that plate was, et cetera. So think of this kind of mass, very well-organized law enforcement effort that's going to run simultaneously with constant cross-lines communication between everybody by identifying the various aspects of this particular incident in unison so that we can identify who the person was, how he got there, who he was associated with, as well as the crime scene itself, the device, the ordnance, what was used, where it could have been acquired from, et cetera.
All right. Bill, Paul, hang in there, guys. I want to bring in CBS News radio reporter Matt Piper. He is on the scene at 42nd and 9th Street. Hey, Matt, what's it looking like over there?
Hey, Anne-Marie. Well, I'm about a block from where Brooke is, and it just seems like commuter chaos to me. There's just thousands of people on the street. Let me just flip this around for you, just so you can see what this looks like here. There's a whole lot of people just asking what was going on. There's so many buses, by the way. Port Authority is, of course, where hundreds of buses on an average morning here in New York City go into to bring people to work, to bring people just to New York City in general. Those buses are now all along the streets here, with people having to be dropped off on the streets, trying to figure out just what happened. Here at 42nd and 8th Avenue, as you can see, it is shut down. There's police tape here. There are some people who live on this block who are trying to leave their apartments to get to work themselves. I did see at least one ambulance rushing up 9th Avenue when I first got here. And as you can see, there's an ambulance there as well. And there's also just many, many police officers who have converged on this area, Anne-Marie, to close it off to commuters, to cars, and everyone in between.
I see that the area is closed off. It doesn't look like officers are being particularly assertive at getting people out of the way. They just sort of want them, it seems like, away from the Port Authority, but not further back.
Exactly. You know, surprisingly, this is a pretty close police scene. It's usually not until a couple hours after an investigation has already started that they start to widen the scene and push media, push people back. We are surprisingly close to Port Authority because it's essentially right behind these buildings that you see here behind me here at 42nd and 8th. The tunnel where the buses go into is that tunnel right there at 41st and 8th, where Brooke Silver-Braga was reporting from. But in terms of just everyone here standing around trying to figure out what happened, and so many buses and people in this area just getting dropped off on the street corner and not knowing where to go from here.
Yeah, it's going to be probably several hours before things clear up there. Matt Piper, thanks a lot for talking to us. Just want to tell everybody about NYPD News update, just a tweet from NYPD regarding this explosion. One male suspect is in custody, and this may be a little more clarity for us. no injuries other than the suspect at this time. So we had been reporting that one person was injured and one person was in custody. It may actually be the same person. The person who was in possession, we're presuming, of the pipe bomb was also the person being injured. That was injured. We are also getting some news from CBS source saying that the explosion happened in the pedestrian tunnel, and the suspect was wounded in the stomach. On the phone now is CBS investigative producer Pat Milton. Pat, in fact, I think perhaps some of your sources are helping us out here. What can you tell us?
Yes, it appears that the suspect was carrying the device, which also appears to have been a pipe bomb, and it's unclear if the device went off prematurely or intended to be a suicide bomb.
Anything more about who this suspect might be? As I understand it, there's a male in custody. Do we know anything else?
Well, we know that there is a male in custody who is in his 20s, and we're looking to get confirmed his identity. Mm-hmm. He is injured, but we don't know the extent of his injuries.
And the pipe bomb went off in the pedestrian tunnel?
Yes, it's an underground passageway between the Port Authority and Times Square. It's located around 42nd Street in Manhattan.
So I imagine during the morning rush hour, that passageway is packed.
Well, it absolutely sent commuters just scrambling. And as you know, in New York, there's just always a sense of a high alert, especially during the holiday season. The police responded very quickly and cleared the subway lines that sit beneath the building.
Pat, thank you so much for your update. I know you're out there making contact, talking to sources and reporting, so maybe we'll talk to you a little bit later. I appreciate your time. Bill, when we hear about this, perhaps an accidental explosion in the passenger walkway there, a place that is really packed at this time of the morning, it's sort of a bit of a miracle that the only one injured, it seems like at this point, is the suspect who's in custody.
It is. You know, let's look at this as a Christmas miracle, and the fact that many of these so-called terrorists are mental morons, in my opinion. They really can't be of the highest IQ to be doing this in the first place. So the fact that they mess up, as we've seen on the plane, remember the sneaker bomber? Mm-hmm. He was trying to light his sneaker, and the stewardess, the flight attendant, prevented that. You know, thank God these people aren't of the highest IQ, because there would be, in my opinion, a lot more casualties.
Yeah, and not only that, it's that, you know, if you're going to do something like that, this city is probably the most prepared. The NYPD, and you mentioned the Joint Task Force, this city is prepared like none other for this sort of attack. Bill and Paul, thank you so much for joining us, guys. Maybe we'll be talking to you a little bit later, but right now we're going to head to our local coverage, WCBS.
Other people who didn't really know what was going on, they were just told to evacuate. They kind of left more slowly. So it was a widespread situation. It seemed to be different reactions depending on how close you might have been to that explosion. Dick, Mary.
All right, Rena Roy, right on the scene. Thank you, Rena. And not far away, CBS 2's Janelle Burrell, who is also, just as she's been telling us, being pushed back from the scene. What can you see?
Well, Dick and Mary, you can see we're at 42nd and 8th Avenue. You can see a huge presence by not only the Port Authority Police, NYPD, also we've seen the FBI show up here. If you want to take a look over here, you can see some of the people from the counterterrorism unit with their canine units out here. Much less of a sense of urgency than what we saw when we first arrived here on scene. When we got here, shortly after Rena arrived, we were actually inside of the Port Authority bus terminal as NYPD officers were evacuating passengers from the upper levels of the Port Authority bus terminal. The people were streaming down the stairs, evacuating the building, and I can tell you, my photographer and I, we smelled firsthand that smell of, it almost smelled like burnt plastic or burnt rubber. You could smell that permeating throughout the building, and you can faintly smell that outside here where we are now, you know, a couple hours after the fact. But again, hundreds and hundreds of passengers were evacuated, made their way out here onto 42nd as well as 41st Street. They pushed them far away from the scene, so right now we're not near where any of those passengers are because a lot of them were pushed far away, had to find alternate means to get to work this morning. Of course, this taking place during the height of the rush hour commute, a busy, busy Monday morning. A lot of people who we spoke to, by the time we got here, they had no idea what was transpiring because they were not there for the initial blast, but were evacuated in the minutes afterwards. But again, you can see a huge presence by the police department as they get a handle on this situation. Earlier, we saw Joe Lota, the head of the MTA, head into the Port Authority with a number of detectives from the NYPD. So apparently it seems as though it was safe enough for them to go inside to get up close to where the bomb detonated to get a better sense of the situation. But again, they are keeping civilians quite a distance away from the terminal at this time, Dick and Mary.
Yeah, we can also say that, Janelle, a lot of people who are just getting up, walk out the door, don't even know what happened, would be headed towards the Port Authority, and that, I imagine, would create a rather of a crushed situation around the Port Authority, whether the people were trying to get away from what had just happened or to get into where think they were going to get where they were going. Are you seeing a sense of people are still chaotic in terms of going around the terminal?
Well, at this point, you can see some of the emergency service unit members from the NYPD making their way towards the terminal. At this point, to answer your question, most civilians have been pushed a couple blocks away from the Port Authority now, so you're not really seeing any passengers any longer. But initially, when they were evacuated, some people were hanging around trying to see what was going on, but eventually made their way to other subway stations to head to work, because all of the subway entrances in and around the Port Authority at this point are shut down, are barricaded by police officers.
Janelle Burrell, thank you very much for that update. And we wanted to just give you an update from the NYPD. Sources were telling us earlier that the one male suspect was in custody and that it could have been that person being the only person injured. And now, yes, the NYPD is confirming that one male suspect is in custody. No injuries other than the suspect at this time is what they've tweeted out. They say, of course, to avoid the area and subways bypassing Port Authority and Times Square Station. But at this time, the NYPD is saying that is the only injury, that he injured himself in this, a man in his 20s from Brooklyn, possibly wearing a bomb vest, which would be unprecedented, never happening before in the continental U.S.
Yeah, the idea of a suicide bomber. Yeah.
Exactly, and we were talking to our expert in regard to that.
Well, we can also report right now that a federal law enforcement official is saying that the device malfunctioned. The source said it didn't fully detonate, which possibly caused the injury. Now, of course, that does not answer the question whether the suspect intended to make it go off at that point or whether perhaps it just went off on his body. We're told he may have had two devices. One went off, one was still on him. And obviously, if it was in a vest form, raises the question of a suicide bomber, something we've never seen in the U.S. before for a number of reasons, in part because it's very difficult, the indoctrination required to get someone to be a suicide bomber. It's one thing to just go and, you know, perhaps leave a device. It's quite another to, you know, detonate one, although we did see this driver going down the West Side Highway, who many believed when he jumped out of his vehicle was intent on getting himself killed by police. Of course, he was shot, but that raises the question, indeed, do we have another set of problems on our hand? I know we've talked to the NYPD, we've talked to the police commissioner and other security experts who say the real fear is the lone wolf, not necessarily inspired or directed from another country. Are we seeing that? Well, the good news is the suspect is alive. He'll be able to be questioned, and they'll certainly be able to find out more from his history online.
President Trump has been briefed in regard to this matter, and we are awaiting word from the mayor and police commissioner at this time as to what they know, who this man is. Was he acting alone? Are they looking for any other suspects at this time? But Whether this is a game changer is a big question at this time as to whether we are looking at a different form of terrorism and a suicide bomber. And also, where did he get those devices? Were they rudimentary devices? Were they more sophisticated? We did hear a vest, we heard wires, and we heard pipe bomb. But what type of devices those were, we don't know. Now, Dick, earlier you were saying that possibly this happened in a pedestrian tunnel.
Yeah, that is at least some of the reporting we're having, that it's a pedestrian tunnel, that it was leading to one of the subway stops. That would certainly indicate two things. Number one, he was certainly trying to hurt as many people as possible. And number two, perhaps if he was in a more enclosed area, that any explosion might have been a little more contained. There's often the inspiration that these terrorists are given online is to go to the middle of as large a crowd as possible, perhaps an area that is a little more open, and then see just how far the the device can travel from that one area. If he was indeed in a long hallway, that would change the nature. But it appears that however this device went off, it didn't go off much at all if it only injured the suspect, who, by the way, we have some reporting that he was severely injured. Early reports said it was just lacerations, but you could imagine there has to be some sort of injury.
Yeah, early on it was lacerations, but then we were hearing it was in the stomach area.
Right.
So, of course, he is at Bellevue right now, and police certainly are there, and we will give you an update on his condition and exactly what injuries he sustained in this. But again, carrying two devices, we understand that man in custody. But right now, New York City is basically on lockdown in the Manhattan area. Can you tell us, Alex, what we're looking at right now?
So let's first start with the roads, because this is some new information that we're just receiving. West Side Highway is closed between 57th and 42nd Streets. Wow. 14th, 23rd, and 34th Streets, everything in between, closed river to river through the area. 8th Avenue is closed 34th to 42nd Street. We also have a tube closed at the Queens Midtown Tunnel. That's just for emergency personnel to be able to commute back and forth. We have some new subway changes as well. 1, 2, 3, and 7, as well as the NQR, WAC, and E trains are bypassing 42nd Street. A and C trains are now running and stopping along the D line. E trains are running on the F line. We talked about the perimeter for road closures, but now people are specifically asking about buses. The Port Authority retweeting that the bus terminal is still closed there as well. So New Jersey Transit bus service to New York Port Authority will divert to Secaucus and Newark Penn Station for train service to then get into New York. And those tickets and passes are going to be cross-honored on New Jersey Transit rail service, light rail, path, and ferry service. Also, if you are on an inbound express bus, because I'm getting a lot of tweets about this, yes, you are being detoured at this time to the bus lot 40th Street and 10th Avenue. So, Mary, you said it on lockdown. Yes, we have different changes on the roads and the rails.
Yeah, and I'm a little concerned, Ellis, when you think about the fact that they're closing roads river to river. I don't recall, unless when the president comes here, when they literally shut down roads so
I'm not even sure if we've ever heard of it then.
I mean, just perhaps in that case, when a presidential motorcade goes from the heliport to areas in Midtown, you hear all roadways crossed. But it may only be for the fact that it makes the authorities.
Well, that's exactly what they're calling it. They're titling it emergency vehicle access, so that they have clear right away in both directions for them to get to where they need to be.
And now, when you talk about the spiraling effect, the West Side Highway closed from 57th to 42nd Street. That's going to go all the way up the West Side Highway to the George Washington Bridge, et cetera, et cetera.
And it's still a busy portion of the morning commute. We have a lot of people traveling right now.
So again, the city on lockdown right now in the Manhattan area. Alex, thank you very much for that latest information. And so what we know right now in regard to the suspect possibly wearing a vest, and one witness described him possibly having wires coming out of him. So when we talk about this game changer of a situation in regard to the terror threat, we may be seeing it right here, right now, near Times Square at the Port Authority bus terminal, happening at 7:19 this morning. A man with possibly two devices on him, one partially detonated. People definitely heard the noise of the explosion there. There was smoke, and they were smelling that burnt rubber is what they were describing it as. And now we're about an hour and a half into it, and that suspect is at Bellevue Hospital in custody and the only person injured in this.
We have some new information from our sources from the NYPD. They're telling us that the device to be crude, a homemade pipe bomb type device. It exploded prematurely. We're also told that there is video that shows the suspect walking down the passageway when the device exploded without warning. The suspect has injuries, and according to this information, wires were protruding from devices as if they were hastily made, and the bomb squad was on the scene to disarm those devices. And that's the information we have right now.
So let's get to Rena Roy. She is at the scene right now. She's been giving us information throughout the morning and uncovering new details for us. Rena, give us the latest as to what you know now.
Well, Dick and Mary, we are just getting that new information in as well. Just to recap what we are hearing from our sources, and I have the notes here, that this appeared to have been a crude homemade pipe bomb device that exploded prematurely, and really it is almost a miracle that it did, because so far what we know is that just that suspect was injured when our sources are telling us that that pipe bomb went off without warning as he was walking. We are also learning that this did not happen on Port Authority property, but just right before, though Port Authority police are assisting with the investigation. And what we are hearing also is that there was possibly video of that man in his 20s, again, possibly from Brooklyn, walking down a passageway when that device exploded, again, without warning, prematurely. And it appeared to have been a homemade pipe bomb with wires protruding from the device as if it was very quickly made. Doesn't appear to have been maybe a professional bomb. And then also what we are hearing is that this appears to have been a lone wolf type of attack. So doesn't appear that anyone else was involved with this. But of course, the NYPD, they are still here on the scene. This happened just about an hour and a half ago. So really, this is just the beginning of the investigation. You can see behind me, the crime scene unit just showed up. And actually, you know, there wasn't much urgency within the last 20 minutes. But now you see, of course, that is very fluid. The situation is very fluid. You can see the bomb squad, NYPD police bomb squad unit racing here to this scene. So it really just continues out here as we continue to get new information. We do know that President Trump has been briefed. We know that the mayor is aware of it. We are waiting on more information, possibly a press conference with some top city officials. But again, as you can see, that police bomb squad truck is right in the middle of the intersection here on 42nd and 8th. Dick, Mary.
All right, Rena, thank you very much for all of that information. So again, a crude device, a homemade pipe bomb, possibly strapped to this suspect with wires coming out of him. It then went off apparently in a pedestrian walkway. So what we hear now is that it could be a lone wolf here, but still the streets closed river to river in certain areas of Manhattan definitely indicates a certain concern about whether there may be anything else.
And it just seems that our sources are guiding us that this is perhaps a lone wolf, but you have to raise the question. We're literally an hour and a half, approximately an hour and 45 minutes since the situation has unfolded, and you can only imagine that there's not been a lot of investigation into his online activity, and that would give us a much greater indication if indeed this is a lone wolf, or as they say, is it someone who is directed perhaps from overseas, perhaps from a terror organization, or just inspired by what the person has been reading on the internet. The inspiration, we can tell you from the experts, has been to encourage people, the lone wolves, to carry out attacks more recently, with trucks. And that was the situation we had on the West Side Highway not very long ago. This is a much more attempt at a sophisticated attack, trying to put a bomb together. And as least we can tell you in this situation, this suspect failed. And we are now told, I'm just being told, that there are 3 injuries, including the suspect. And as we mentioned earlier, as time goes on, it tends to make itself more clear how many people are injured. We don't get those early reports as quickly or as accurately as we might imagine.
So now 3 people injured, as well as the suspect. We don't have in regard to the conditions of those injured, but of course we are working to determine every bit of information in regard to that. But again, 3 people now injured, as well as the suspect who was injured when that device exploded without warning. He was walking through a passenger walkway in the Port Authority bus terminal right beforehand, Rena Roy was telling us. But again, giving you a live look right now, 42nd and 8th, and you see people looking toward that area. They have cordoned off that space to make sure no one gets close to it. Janelle Burrell was telling us that they did still smell smoke. It smelled like burnt rubber is what she was saying. But again, a lot of people, onlookers, you would imagine, trying to figure out what information they could ascertain as well. And some people just trying to figure out how to get where they need to go. The other picture on your screen, we are seeing all of the emergency personnel who are at the scene, and we have nearly every agency when it comes to investigations there and when it comes to security there to make sure that everyone is safe and that the danger is over.
We'll give you a few more updates. We're being told right now, our sources are telling us that the suspect in custody is in his 20s and that he is from Bangladesh. And also, on a second front, on a traffic front, that one lane of the Midtown Tunnel has been closed. Once again, we probably suspect that that is due to the fact that the police are trying to very quickly get around town, just perhaps to check out leads, perhaps to see if there's the possibility of an accomplice, if there's a possibility of another operation in progress. But obviously, that is something that there is no information about, but is certainly on the minds of the police. We have street closures that are going from river to river at this time. I think, Alex, you said 14th, 23rd, the roads that go...
As well as 34th.
And 34th, the roads that go from river to river. I have to tell you, here we are at 8:59 in the morning, and if you're heading into New York City, you are heading into one giant mess, and not just on mass transit. The streets are, it would seemingly Midtown will be impassable right now. I mean, this would be an extraordinarily difficult situation for anyone trying to get across town or even up and downtown. You also mentioned, Alex, that the West Side Highway was closed between 57th and 42nd Streets. So it's quite a spiraling, pirouetting impact all around the city that this one situation has happened at the Port Authority bus terminal.
We're going to get now to Janelle Burrell with some more information from the scene, and we do understand that the explosion was heard, but they're saying now it wasn't a large explosion, I guess, relatively speaking, but possibly a small pipe bomb which caused this, and it was just like 200 feet from the terminal, so 42nd and 8th. But let's get to Janelle Burrell with the latest information from the scene. Janelle, what do you see?
Well, Mary and Dick, I can tell you a short time ago, Mayor de Blasio, as well as FDNY Commissioner Danielle Nigro, arrived here on scene. They were escorted toward the Port Authority bus terminal where, as you can see, still a very large police presence. We saw an additional bomb squad unit show up here not too long ago. There are a number of K-9 units. Now the FBI has joined the investigation as well. There are officials here from the Joint Terrorism Task Force, which we understand from some of our sources are now the lead agency dealing with this investigation. You can see some other cars arriving here on scene. I can tell you that there was a representative from Governor Cuomo's office who was here on scene, and some people from the police department said they're anticipating a press conference to fill us in on some of the details within the hour. So hopefully that will be able to fill in a lot of the unanswered questions we still have pertaining to all of this. Just to recap for you, when we got here on the scene shortly after that bomb went off, we were actually inside of the Port Authority bus terminal as NYPD officers were guiding people out of the terminal, evacuating them out of the terminal. So there were just streams of hundreds and hundreds of people coming down the stairs, getting outside onto the street at 8th Avenue and 41st Street, and also at the exit on 42nd Street as well. I can tell you that because that was several minutes after the explosion had taken place, there was a sense of calm. Everybody was very orderly as they were being escorted out. Police put up their tape immediately and were pushing people as far away from the Port Authority building as they could. Since that time, they have expanded their perimeter by several blocks, so most of those passengers who were getting on and off those buses. They have since been moved from the scene, but I can tell you it was the height of the Monday morning rush hour commute, so it was a very, very busy time for the Port Authority. Most of those people have found alternate means to get to work. A lot of people are hanging around initially to try to figure out what exactly had been going on, but of course, because it's so cold outside and because they did have work to get to, they have since left. So I can tell you right now, a huge perimeter around the Port Authority bus terminal, several blocks in either direction, as police, the FBI, the Joint Terrorism Task Force, as well as the Port Authority Police take over this investigation and assess the situation here.
All right, Janelle Burrell, who was on the scene at the Port Authority bus terminal and was in the terminal about an hour ago, not long after that explosion, which apparently has injured 3 people, including the suspect who was in custody, a gentleman who was in his 20s from Bangladesh. We're told he was walking with 2 devices, where one of them apparently went off prematurely. It appears to be a crude device, and it's perhaps suggested that he was wearing it under a vest, which suggests the possibility, at least, of an attempt at being a suicide bomber, but it's probably way too early to tell that.
Yes, the initial reports from police are that there were wires attached to it, and we await that information. We understand that he has been in the United States for 7 years, again from Bangladesh.
All right, so we've been watching coverage from WCBS, our local CBS affiliate here in New York City. The news today: a explosion in the Port Authority facility in the pedestrian walkway between Port Authority and Times Square. The suspect is in custody and is in fact injured. The instrument of the explosion, a pipe bomb that at least early indications suggest that the pipe bomb was attached to the suspect. It exploded. Whether it was deliberate, whether it was premature, we do not know. But the explosion resulted in some injuries. The most significant, it appears, is to the actual suspect. But WCBS is reporting that at least 3 other people were injured as well. What we know about the suspect who is in custody is that he's 20 years old and he is from Bangladesh, and that is all we know right now. I want to bring in Ron Hosko, who's a former FBI assistant director and a CBSN security analyst. Ron, we've talked about this before. Here we go again. When you heard about this possible pipe bomb exploding in the Port Authority pedestrian walkway, what came to mind?
Well, I just go back to just a few years ago where you had Faisal Shahzad attempting the Times Square bombing, Najibullah Zazi, who attempted a subway bombing in New York, I think it was in 2010. I think we know by now that New York is a prevalent top-tier terrorist target for actions such as these. New York is the bullseye in America. Mm-hmm. It is so easy to find gatherings of people that makes it alone a top target. This time of year with holiday travelers, the potential impact on commerce, on finance in New York, the chilling effect of tourists deciding it's too dangerous to go. All of those are within the terrorist calculus as they look to do these events. And we know, too, that as American forces and our allies continue to attrit ISIS in the Middle East, there was an expectation, I think there still is, that ISIS still has tremendous influence, and we will see that influence apart from what's going on in the Middle East.
You mentioned the time of year. The last attack was October 30th here in New York. Saifullah Saipov drove a rented truck into people on a bike path. And there was a lot of talk at the time that it was the eve of Halloween, a time when many people are out and about with their families, but particularly in Manhattan, there is a lot of revelry. There's a massive parade on Halloween. It's a holiday time, and it is the season when terrorists also consider attacking.
Right. Terrorists, and we've seen this in multiple attacks, they are looking at the calendar. They're looking at certain dates that may reflect back on some other attempt or some significant date in history. So I don't think today is unlikely to be accidental with respect to the timing. although we've heard that the ISIS ideology change in terrorist thinking in recent years, where it has really been a choose your own timing, decide when it's a workable time for you, choose the instruments of destruction. And so we can't foreclose the possibility that this terrorist thought, well, today's as good as any day. I have my bombs ready, or my bomb ready, and he thought he was ready to execute this. And we've seen, and we've seen this in the past too, where terrorist explosive devices, and I go back to Shahzad in the Times Square bombing, the device itself was improperly constructed to do the harm that he intended. Here, that does happen with pipe bombs, where you see even skilled terrorists, Ramzi Youssef being a significant one, who was in part identified and uncovered in the Philippines after a fire in an apartment where he was cooking up his evil devices. Mm-hmm. And I think he disfigured himself in his attempt, too. And that was a skilled bomb maker. So you see, not uncommonly, where novice bomb makers get hurt themselves, and that could be what's happened today.
Right. So are pipe bombs particularly simple but also particularly unstable?
It depends on the construction, and unmistakably here, the FBI will be trying to reconstruct this device to understand its true potential power. They will be going back with NYPD and others to track back every one of the components and look at video where those components were purchased, look to see if anybody else might have been involved. But, the short answer is yes. Mm-hmm. Pipe bombs very often are constructed with black powder. It is unstable. It is subject to to friction, igniting it. And if it's ignited in one way, it can just burn. It's really the containing of that black powder that makes it much more dangerous and makes it become a potential explosive. But if you are building simple pipe bombs at home and you construct them the wrong way, you have a good chance of blowing yourself up, blowing your house up, or certainly igniting a significant fire. So there's a certain amount of care. And it could be that this would-be terrorist today did not know precisely what they were doing, or missed a step, or made a mistake, and this thing ignited on him or partially detonated on him prematurely, so before it reached its intended target.
I know Paul Violas, you're standing by as well, right, Paul? Is Paul there? Okay. Paul, you're a CBSN security analyst. We're talking about the nature of these pipe bombs and that they can be particularly unstable. But is it pretty easy to get the components for an explosive like this? Is it just a matter of going down to your local hardware store, or are there other measures in place to sort of track people who are buying components of a bomb like this?
I think it's really difficult to do that, Emery, to be completely upfront here, so our viewers understand. I mean, what you're talking about is a very crude device. It's easy to assemble. They're using components that could be acquired. They're readily available from department stores, plus other legal sources. So for us to think that we'd be able to try to track somebody that's trying to build a pipe bomb, it's relatively impossible.
Just to bring our audience up to speed now, our latest update from the New York Fire Department: 4 injuries at the scene of the explosion and then at the Port Authority. All those injuries are non-life-threatening, so one can assume that this bomb explosion did not go off according to plan, unless the plan was, of course, for the suspect to injure himself the most, because that seems to be what happened. But there were 4 other people injured in the explosion. The explosion happening in the pedestrian pathway underneath Port Authority, usually bringing people from, say, the Times Square area to Port Authority. It's usually packed at a time like this. This is the morning rush hour, and it is absolutely remarkable how authorities were able to evacuate this incredibly busy building. 200,000 people go through that building every day. It spans several blocks, and they were able to evacuate that entire building in short order. Paul, the NYPD, along with the other counterterrorism law enforcement groups here in New York, this is pretty much the best in the business here in this city.
No, there's no question about that. And that's not to take anything away, Anne-Marie, from the incredible law enforcement community that we have across the United States. But this is something that the city of New York has invested a significant amount of money in, not just to train their officers and their supervisors with respect to handling situations like this, but also to collaborate with such great agencies like the FBI on an ongoing basis for joint training so that if, God forbid, something like this does in fact happen, that they respond efficiently and expeditiously, and that's the key. That's what we're seeing right here.
Ron, you talked about some of the messaging coming out of ISIS, that at this point it's whenever you can do it, wherever you can do it, using whatever instrument you can use, have at it. Those are sort of marching orders, for lack of a better phrase, that are vast. We've seen terrorists use vehicles, most recently here in New York, but certainly in Europe. We've seen sort of random stabbings, where people might be in a park and someone just sort of pulls out a knife and starts stabbing people at random. And certainly we've seen explosives. We saw it outside the Ariana Grande concert in May, and we also saw it in the London Tube, the Underground, in September. With instructions so vast, I mean, it's got to be a challenge for law enforcement here and in Europe to try and identify someone who could pose a threat.
It is a substantial challenge, and I go back a decade when I was still in the FBI, and we really did have this notion that no puck could get in the net, that we had to, and we were capable of defending against each and every one of these. But it is so dependent on your intelligence, and unquestionably now with the ISIS ideology that civilian targets are just as valued as military or law enforcement targets, that opens up the scope of potential victims. That opens up the scope to potential attackers to do anything at any moment. We're long beyond the years where terrorist recruitment meant go to a training camp in northwest Pakistan. And this is train yourself, find it on the internet, which you can. You can find all kinds of terrorist instructions and manuals on the internet, bomb-making instructions easily. And so it's made law enforcement's job exponentially harder. And we've seen occasions where attacks do succeed in some ways. And in a way, this attack succeeded because look at us. We're having this conversation now. A would-be terrorist was able to ignite something in downtown Manhattan. And that alone is a great concern for law enforcement, is a great concern for New York authorities. And so it's made it exponentially harder for law enforcement and much more critical for the typical citizen, somebody who may be selling black powder in unusual volume to somebody that they've never sold to, and the person is acting suspiciously. Somebody who is selling hobby fuse or is selling lengths of pipe with end caps that raise a concern where law enforcement desperately needs the help of civilians in any capacity to say, I see something unusual, here's a license number, here's a description, here the person is on my video, and give them a starting point. Could be they're leading them to nothing, but that's their job. They're working around the clock to cover those leads and hopefully prevent a terrorist attack, and that does occur.
You know what the concern is, Ron, for all of us, that we are going to, alert law enforcement to somebody who's just kind of going about their business, that we're going to, disrupt someone's life based on a gut feeling. Though that mantra of if you see something, say something is something we hear a lot, particularly if you're riding by public transportation like I do, there's still a little bit of maybe resistance or discomfort with saying, hey, there's a bag that's on the floor over there and no one's picked it up.
Yeah, there is, and that's unfortunate because law enforcement, particularly, having been in the FBI and knowing what it takes to predicate a case, to start, and know our requirements to end a case. Look, they have, whether it's NYPD, the FBI, or the small town in America, they have finite resources, and they have to focus those resources, and that very often means concluding an investigation when it doesn't take you someplace. And actually, we've seen that as a challenge for the FBI and some police in some occasions where you start an investigation logically and appropriately, that the subjects of that investigation don't really take you anywhere, and the investigation must close, and then you see someone become activated because of travel. The Tsarnaev brothers come immediately to mind, where the FBI was criticized, but at a certain point they closed the investigation because they had nothing with which to proceed. The Tsarnaevs travel to the Caucasus, where some think they were radicalized. They come back. There's no trigger that says start this investigation again, and then bad happens. So there are criticisms. This is happening in Europe as well, where the law enforcement and intelligence investigators are really overwhelmed with cases, and you have to prioritize, but they would far rather have that lead. They would far rather have that tip than not have it.
That is very fascinating what you just said, and very illuminating, because it has come up before, not just here, but in England, where suspects were known to authorities at some point. And, we asked that question. Well, if they popped up on your radar once before, how did this happen? How did they slip through the net? We can talk a little bit more about that, Ron and Paul, but right now I want to head to Brooke Silva Braga. He's at the scene. He's been giving us updates this morning. Brooke, what do you know?
Good morning, Anne-Marie. Well, first, what I can tell you from here, the scene, which was incredibly chaotic and crowded in the minutes an hour after, has calmed down. People are making an improvisational commute home, or I should say to work, or in many cases maybe to home if they can't get to work. But what was a massive folks around 8 a.m. has now slowed to a trickle because they've successfully closed down the Port Authority. They did it a little after 8 a.m. local time. Some details filtering in about how this went down. We understand that it was actually in a tunnel in between the Port Authority behind me and the Times Square subway station in that direction. Now, that is usually a very busy place where folks on two different subway lines would be going underground to get to the other line, making a transfer. And yet, remarkably, just a handful of injuries. We understand 4 injuries at this point, and that could be because authorities believe that the bomb went off prematurely. That the suspect who was captured also had a second bomb that he wasn't able to detonate at all. He's now in the hospital with what's described as non-life-threatening injuries. And the investigation proceeds apace here. Cars from all different branches of law enforcement coming by, parking out, folks in tactical gear at the entrance, which you can't see around the vans here, are an entrance where buses come in and out if they're going on regional routes. This is a major hub, not just for daily commuters, but regional bus transit throughout the Northeast and really the nation. Greyhound bus terminal is just behind me as well. And so that entrance has been guarded by folks in tactical gear, but a whole array of authorities have gathered here and are investigating what seems to be a miraculously non-lethal but very scary event here.
Yeah, miraculous indeed that more people were not injured, that the suspect didn't kill himself in the process, and that there is at least an example of at least a second instrument, a second bomb, and I'm sure authorities will be using that to further their investigation. Brooke Silva Braga down at the Port Authority. Thank you so much, Brooke. So we have some new video to show you. Brooke described what occurred, that this bomb went off, probably unplanned, in the pedestrian walkway between the Times Square station and the Port Authority. And we have video from within that walkway. Let's take a look.
He's the guy in the hoodie. No, he never took his hand out of the pocket.
So there you have the video. It's actually really remarkable. You see just how many people are in the walkway at that time, that huge puff of smoke. And when the smoke clears, one individual is flat on his back on the ground, no one else around him. And hopefully what that means is that the other people who were injured, and we know their injuries were life-threatening, they were at least able to get out of the way. And this is a photograph of the suspect on the ground. You can see where his shirt has been literally sort of burned and perhaps even burned off of his body. We were told that he received injuries to his abdomen, his stomach area, but he is alive, and those injuries are non-life-threatening. He was transferred to the Bellevue Hospital. And you heard Brooke say that he had another bomb on him, one that didn't explode. Of course, we don't know all the details here. But seeing as the bomb exploded in the area of his abdomen, one can assume that he was carrying it close to his body, or at least carrying it in that area. What we know about the suspect thus far, he's a 20-year-old man. He's from Bangladesh. We don't know how long he has been in this country. That has yet to be confirmed. So very few details, but really remarkable video from that pedestrian walkway. Paul, this is just sort of stunning. I imagine that it is a gift of sorts to authorities as this investigation unfolds to be able to have an intact bomb that did not explode. Paul Violas, can you hear me?
Yes, loud and clear. Can you hear me, Anne-Marie?
Yeah, I can hear you. So, you know, according to Brooke, there was another device, another bomb. It did not explode. That's got to be a gift for investigators.
There's no question that is. I mean, the other part that's a gift is that he's alive, Anne-Marie. That's very important to us, because we're going to have the ability, skilled interviewers, the best interviewers in the world are going to have the opportunity to interview him and garner as much information as possible. That's intel that's priceless to us. So that's also a big plus for us right here.
Ron, when these guys are interviewed, typically, do they give up a lot of information?
Depends. There are those who really have no hardwired communications with other terrorists and other organizations. They're inspired on the internet. Law enforcement is going to have that information very quickly, and it could be that they lay out exactly what they were intending to do. And there are those who say, you know, make your case, law enforcement, and this happens in the criminal realm as well. And they tell you, I have nothing to say. I want an attorney, and nothing is said. Here, in this case, you know, there will be a press by law enforcement to potentially push beyond or not Mirandize him immediately and do a public safety style interview that tries to get current intelligence. Are there co-conspirators? Is there another threat, or is this part of a bigger threat? So that decision will probably be made early this morning.
All right, Ron, Paul, I want you to hang on with us. We're going to take our viewers back to our local news coverage, WCBS. Let's tune into them.
Of course, we need to wait to determine whether this is the person that police have in custody, but this is the picture that the suspect had on him, and very clear picture. And there's also video of all of this transpiring inside that passageway, and so we are awaiting that as well. But this is what we're seeing, the identity possibly of the suspect.
Yeah, he's been described as approximately 27 years old, a Bangladeshi native, perhaps living in Brooklyn. The early reports from our sources say that he is a lone wolf, but obviously it's pretty difficult to make that determination before you've had a thorough review of his online activity and whether he had any connections abroad. These are all questions that need to be answered. In the meantime, though, we're going to go to Rena Roy, who's been on the scene almost from the beginning. And Rena, what are you learning now?
Hey, get it, you need it. Well, Dick and Mary, we are actually awaiting that press conference that you just mentioned. We are going to be hearing from top city officials. We know that Joe Lhota is here. We know that Daniel Nigro, FDNY commissioner, is here, as well as the mayor of New York City, Mayor de Blasio. You can see that there is a media gaggle right here behind me. We're hoping to hear from them any moment now. We do know that those top city officials, they have been in and out of Port Authority, which is actually right across 8th Avenue behind me. They are just beginning their investigation. As we have been talking about, we do know there was some kind of video of that male suspect in his 20s from Brooklyn, originally from Bangladesh, who has been here for about 7 years. That is what we are hearing. We know that there was video of him walking through a passageway leading up to Port Authority. That is when that homemade bomb prematurely exploded, injuring him. And we do know that 3 other people were injured. So 4 people in total right now. We don't know the extent of their injuries. We don't know how they were injured. But again, that total number is 4. We're hoping to get a lot more details from those city officials when they come out of Port Authority behind me to give us an update on what they know right now. But of course, this is a very, very fluid situation. This happened at around 7:20 this morning. As you guys know, we got here just moments after that happened, with commuters who were terrified on their way to work when they heard that explosion, and they were immediately evacuated out of this area. So as you can see, there is no one in this area except for media and pretty much every official you can imagine from the federal, state, and city level. Dick, Mary?
All right, Rena Roy has been on the scene till shortly after this started, about 7:15 this morning. You know, another point right now we have to be wondering about, we just showed what it's believed to be the photo of the suspect who is in custody, is the question of whether he has been so-called inspired, directed, or is a lone wolf. And that is a very crucial question, but we've seen by the response of the NYPD closing roads, apparently needing to get around the city quickly, checking out any tips they might be getting, as we know there are probably numerous tips they're getting, and determining very quickly, because remember, it's only been about 2 hours since the attack, whether or not there could be someone else out there. And that is the continuing fear of everyone in law enforcement.
Okay, let's give you right now the video from inside the tunnel. We're going to play it for you now, and we'll be watching it as you do, the explosion under the Port Authority bus terminal. And as we right now look at those live pictures for you to show you what we are seeing right now, and as we are gathering that video and want to present it to you, this again, the surveillance video from underground, and here you go.
Well, okay.
And there you have it.
Wow.
There was a blast right now. There was the smoke, and yes, you know, when we were talking about people not around him, and there he is, and those people ran and they got away quickly. But that is the video that we've been talking about, the surveillance video underground, and you're going to see a hand pointing to it in a moment.
There it is. And wow, there it is. And there are people all around him. We see some have gone down. Once again, we don't know the extent of the injuries of the people who were injured in addition to the suspect, but that is quite extraordinary. That is a crowded area. That's sort of your worst nightmare situation.
And we're going to play for you again so you can take a very clear look at that. I know it's difficult to see because it's grainy video, but again, we're going to take a look at it again for a moment so that you can see again that very moment. And as you said, Dick, there were so many people around that area.
And the other thing that you're getting from this photo, at least, there goes the explosion right there, and the suspect goes down, and then that goes in the foreground.
The suspect stays down, and then you're going to see police rushing to that area to make sure that he does not get up and move ahead. But right now, that's what we are stopping it at, so you can see it there. Again, the smoke filling that area, and it does look like whether it was unintentional, it certainly looks that way. It doesn't look like he stopped at all. It didn't look like he made a move at all. It looked like he was just walking through that passenger.
And it is a very narrow hallway, which can be good and can be bad. In this situation, generally a narrow hallway will contain the blast, but the people around that area could certainly be at risk. In this case, at least three people around him were injured. And then the smoke situation that was created. And I know, Janelle Burrell, you were on the scene earlier, and when you were reporting to us earlier, you were telling us you could smell that smoke from your position where you were in and around the Port Authority, Janelle.
Yeah, that's right, Dick and Mary. So right now we are at 42nd and 8th, just across the street from the Port Authority bus terminal, where you can see the front of the building. And yeah, well, we were inside. This had to be probably 20 or 30 minutes so after that blast. We were inside of the building. You could smell that sort of burnt plastic smell throughout the building as we saw NYPD officers escorting the thousands of passengers who were inside of the terminal as that explosion went off. So right now you can see the perimeter that police have set up. What you're looking at right now, that's 41st and 8th Avenue. And then if you want to come this way, it extends all the way around. This is 42nd and 8th, where you can see this huge army of police. We have some of the bomb squad as well as Port Authority police out here awaiting the press conference from Mayor de Blasio, as well as the police commissioner and the commissioner of the FDNY. This is where, on the other side, you can see they have the media assembled ahead of that press conference. And then if you want to flip around over here, this is one of the subway entrances that is now blocked off as a result of this investigation. You can see some of the officers heading this way across 42nd Street. This perimeter extending all the way down to Broadway, where you can see some people, pedestrians are walking, and traffic has begun to move again since the closures were put into place. But again, at this point, from our vantage point, it seems as though they have about a 2-block radius perimeter set up around the Port Authority terminal building as this investigation gets underway. But we're expecting the mayor to brief us momentarily to fill us in on some of the details about the situation. Dick and Mary.
All right, Janelle, thank you very much. Of course, we'll get back to you in a moment with more information. And Janelle, as you've been speaking, we have been continuously showing you this video of the surveillance inside that passenger tunnel and the suspect down here. And what I was looking for, Dick Brennan, was whether there were other people who also went down and whether there was anyone else injured next to him. But as I'm looking at it, and after the blast went off, I don't see anyone else on the ground with him. It looks like they were able to get out of the way, unless I'm seeing something differently than you might be.
No, and obviously it is very, there's a fog situation from the smoke that has come there, and we don't know exactly where the bomb was in the front part of his body, in the back part of his body, what kind of a concussion it created, and just what the partial detonation was, because that's been the description we've gotten from authorities. But what occurs to me as so extraordinary watching this video now is we are watching it a mere 2 hours and 15 minutes after this incident happened. And police have already put out this video. That's pretty extraordinary response by the NYPD.
The other question that we have is what was being said, because there is no audio on it. Did he yell anything?
Great point. Great point.
And that's, of course, a real key piece of information for investigators. Did he say anything before this went off? Initially, we were saying it unintentionally went off, but at this point, we don't know that for sure, and that's something that will have to be determined. But again, as we're looking at it here, it doesn't seem that anyone else is on the ground near him. Now, there were so many people walking around near him, and how lucky they are to just get out of the way before this happened.
Yep.
It was pretty remarkable to watch.
Because he appears to be within 1 or 2 feet of the people surrounding him here, and it is almost inconceivable that you wouldn't think that someone was very seriously injured. We are reporting that there are 3 injured people in addition to the suspect. We don't know the extent of their injuries, but we can only say that it's pretty amazing that a few amount of people were injured. We can tell you that it probably, at least according to the authorities, believes to be a premature detonation, because if you were looking to have the greatest impact, as we've seen in situations like these, you try to go to an area that's a little wider, it's not a narrow tunnel, where there are more people surrounding you, where perhaps you're standing still and you have people standing still surrounding you. And it certainly seems like in this situation, as we've been reporting, that this was some sort of premature detonation.
Also, whether he was carrying anything else on him. You know, we've seen rolling suitcases in other situations or anything like that. It does not appear that he has any other large piece of baggage with him. It looks like he is walking possibly with something on him, maybe something next to him, but there isn't one of those large suitcases or rolling backpacks or anything else that we may have, or even a bag that somebody would be able to say he is carrying something and it may be suspicious. In this case, it looks like he is just walking with maybe something on him.
Well, two things makes it more difficult for investigators and in these situations. Number one, in the winter, it's much more easy to conceal the fact that you might have something under your jacket. If this was in the middle of July, it'd be very difficult to be carrying not be suspicious to authorities walking around with some large form of a large vest. The second thing is people are carrying a lot of packages. Remember, we had the report from one eyewitness who said that she heard Christmas carols still blaring on the speaker. This is a time of year when people are carrying things. It's very crowded. There are people surrounding you that are bumping you one way or the other. And that's why, to me, it's so extraordinary when you look at this video and you see that it just didn't have the impact that we thought it did.
So now let's hear from the mayor right now. He is about to speak.
All right, take it easy. Everyone set here? All right, police commissioner. Good morning, everyone's got sound? Good? All right, good morning. Approximately 7:20 this morning, we had a terror-related incident in the subway, the passageway between 42nd and 8th, 42nd and 7th. The governor's going to speak, the mayor's going to speak. I'm going to give you some more details. Dan Nigro is going to talk about some of the minor injuries, and then Joe Lhota is going to talk about subway service. Governor?
Thank you. Thank you. Good morning to everyone. The first news this morning was obviously very frightening and disturbing. When you hear about a bomb in the subway station, which is in many ways one of our worst nightmares, the reality turns out better than the initial expectation and fear. You had a number of law enforcement agencies that did a fantastic job. The NYPD, the PAPD, the Port Authority Police, the MTA Police, they were all on it. You see behind us representatives of all the agencies coordinated. The Assistant Director of the FBI, Bill Sweeney, is here. So everyone worked together. There was an explosion. The police commissioner will go over the details. It was an effectively low-tech device. There were several injuries, we hope minor. And it was handled extraordinarily well. There was a disruption in train service and bus service while a sweep was being done. That's all being restored now, as you'll hear from Joe Lhota. The subway service, except at 42nd Street, is being restored. The Port Authority bus terminal is reopened, so buses will be running once again. This is New York. The reality is that we are a target by many who would like to make a statement against democracy, against freedom. We have the Statue of Liberty in our harbor, and that makes us an international target. We understand that. With the internet now, anyone can go on the internet and download garbage and vileness on how to put together an amateur-level explosive device. And that is the reality that we live with. The counter-reality is that this is New York, and we all pitch together, and we are a savvy people, and we keep our eyes open, and that's what See Something, Say Something is all about. And we have the best law enforcement on the globe, and we're all working together extraordinarily well. I want to thank the mayor and the mayor's office for doing a great job this morning. And we will go forward, and we'll go forward together. All the service will resume. Let's go back to work. We're not going to allow them to disrupt us. That's exactly what they want. And that is exactly what they're not going to get. Thank you.
Well said. Thank you. Thank you very much, Governor. Let's be clear, as New Yorkers, our lives revolve around the subways. When we hear of an attack in the subway, it's incredibly unsettling. And let's be also clear, this was an attempted terrorist attack. Thank God the perpetrator did not achieve his ultimate goals. Thank God our first responders were there so quickly to address the situation to make sure people were safe. Thank God the only injuries, as we know at this point, were minor. But I agree 100% with the governor's point that choice of New York is always for a reason, because we're a beacon to the world, and we actually show that a society of many faiths and many backgrounds can work, and we show that democracy can work, and our enemies want to undermine that. The terrorists want to undermine that, so they yearn to attack New York City. But New York City is blessed with the finest law enforcement, and what our first responders did today was another example of the ability to address the situation quickly, contain it, and make sure people are safe. Let me just say, it's very important for my fellow New Yorkers to know there are no additional known incidents at this time. There are no additional known activities. We will wait for a fuller investigation, of course, by the NYPD and the MTA police and Port Authority police and FBI. But at this point in time, all we know of is one individual who, thank God, was unsuccessful in his aims. There are also no credible and specific threats against New York City at this time. But we will give you more information, of course, as the investigation unfolds. The first responders responded brilliantly. Now the mission of the NYPD is to secure all major transit hubs and major sites in this city. So you'll see expanded NYPD presence today all over the city. New Yorkers have come to understand when you see our specialized forces, when you see those long guns and those highly trained officers, that's something that should be reassuring to you. It means NYPD is on full alert and out in force, and that means you're safe. Finally, want to say, the governor invoked that phrase, we can't say it enough times, when you see something, say something. This is the difference maker. We've seen it time and again. When an everyday New Yorker sees something that doesn't make sense, hears something, sees a package, gets a feeling that something's wrong, don't hold it to yourself. Tell a police officer. They are the ones who can take the information and act on it. It's so important to speak up because you could be saving many lives by doing so. I'll finish by saying this. This is the most resilient place on earth. We've proven it time and time again. We proved it just over a month ago. We proved it on 9/11. We're going to prove it again today. The terrorists will not win. We're going to keep being New Yorkers. Let's get back to work. Thank you.
All right, these are the preliminary facts. So it just happened a couple hours ago, so you have to understand these are preliminary facts. At approximately 7:20, in a below-ground walkway, which connects the I&D line at 42 and 8th Avenue with the IRT line at 42 and 7, and that's the shuttle at Times Square and the 1, 2, and 3 train. Police were called to a reported explosion. Responding units found an injured 27-year-old male. We've identified him as Akayed Ullah, Akayed Ullah. He had burns and wounds to his body. Preliminary investigation at the scene indicates this male was wearing an improvised, low-tech explosive device attached to his body. He intentionally detonated that device. Looks like there were 3 other people in the immediate area also sustained minor injuries, but Dan Nigro is going to talk about that. The subject was placed in custody and transported to Bellevue Hospital. Immediate police response to the scene included members of the Transit Bureau, Emergency Service Division, Bomb Squad, Counterterrorism, MTA Police, State Troopers, and the FBI's Joint Terrorist Task Force. In addition, the NYPD Strategic Response Group and Critical Response Command were assigned to other key transportation hubs in other locations throughout the city as a precautionary measure. This incident was captured on transit system video. A further review and interview of witnesses is underway. A thorough background investigation into Akayed Ullah is being conducted by the Joint Terrorist Task Force. We are asking anyone who may have any information about this individual or incident to call the terror hotline, and that's 888-NYC-SAFE. Just as the governor said, and as the mayor said, we are New Yorkers. We don't live in fear. If you see something that doesn't look right, you have an obligation to come forward, call 911, flag down a cop, and give us a chance to investigate it. Dan Nigro is going to talk about the injuries now. Dan?
Thank Thank you, Jim. As Police Commissioner mentioned, the perpetrator detonated the device. It caused burns to the hands and the abdomen, also lacerations. Our EMS personnel removed the perpetrator to Bellevue Hospital, where they're being treated now. 3 other people that were in proximity of the explosion removed themselves. 2 of them took themselves to Mount Sinai West, 1 to Mount Sinai Queens, all with minor injuries that are consistent with being in the area of the explosion, that is ringing in the ears and headache. So we have 3 minor injuries to people that were in that corridor and serious injuries to the perpetrator. That's it at this time.
Thank you. As the commissioners have both said, and the mayor and the governor both said earlier this morning, we received an alert of the explosion that happened in the tunnel, and immediately the MTA and the Transit Authority shut down the lines on the 8th Avenue line, the A, the C, the E. Many of them were rerouted. I will tell you right now, they are all back. The only disruption we have right now is that on both the 7th Avenue line as well as the 8th Avenue line, we're bypassing the Times Square 42nd Street corridor, and also the shuttle between Grand Central and Times Square is currently shut down. We expect it to be back up and normal by this evening's rush hour. I do want to also state that on November 6th, just a month or so ago, we had a tabletop exercise with the NYPD to coordinate our efforts in the event that something like this ever happened. And the result of that was today, in less than 2 hours, we are back totally up to speed and getting our passengers around. I want to especially thank not only the NYPD, but also our passengers and our customers for their patience. Thank you.
All right, we're going to take some questions. The question is did the subject utter anything before he detonated the device? Part of the investigation.
Commissioner, where was the device located? Potential target for years. I don't know if Joe could address this with the governor, but typically have police on platforms and on trains, but there are a lot of these corridors connecting lines where you don't see a cop. Does this point out a potential security weakness or something that might be addressed?
All right, the question is that transit seems to be an apparent target, and are there any weaknesses downstairs? Listen, we have almost 3,000 transit cops that work in the subway system every day. We have the Strategic Response Group, we have the Critical Response Command. All parts of the system are patrolled.
Commissioner,
yes.
Can you describe, is it a belt, a backpack, or a vest? A little more about the device. And in the video, what does he look like he's doing? Does he look like he's waiting for a big crowd to gather? What is he doing?
All right, the question was, what does the device look like, and what was the subject doing before he detonated? John Miller can talk about that.
Without getting into too many specifics, the device is based on a pipe bomb. It was affixed to his person with a combination of Velcro and zip ties. The bomb squad is in the process now, along with the FBI Special Agent bomb technicians, of processing that crime scene with others. They're going to gather up those pieces, and we'll have a better idea of what the device was put together with and what was inside it.
Hold on. Yeah, we're not going to go into that right now. Dave, hold on, right here. Juliet, hold on, one at a time. Hold on, Juliet.
Did he detonate it himself, and was this done purposely at
Juliet, the question is, did he detonate it himself? In the video, you see him walking down the corridor. That's part of the investigation. We don't know that to be a fact just yet. Right behind Juliet. We're working on that right now. Yeah, right here.
Is there a reason why we're seeing the incident from a few weeks ago, this incident, more now, and we've gone years and years and years in New York since 9/11 with nothing, and now all of a sudden it seems like we are seeing more incidents? Is there a reason why?
There have been incidents, starting with 9/11, but I'll let John talk about that a little bit. All right, sure.
So, as you all know, since the World Trade Center bombing of 1993, and well before that, New York City, as the media capital of the world, has been a target of terrorist attacks in the past. There was the World Trade Center bombing of 1993, the 9/11 attacks, and in the course of post 9/11 world, as you're aware, there's also been approximately 26 plots that we can talk about that have been prevented through intelligence, investigation, and interdiction. As you know, there was the Times Square bombing, which failed to detonate. There was the Chelsea bombing from September 17th of 16, and then there's this incident. So clearly, due to an immense effort that is put into this by the FBI, the NYPD, our intelligence and counterterrorism people, and everybody else, it's an all-hands effort. We have prevented a significant number of plots, a significant number of attacks, but this is a fact of life. Whether you're in New York or London or Paris, the question is, can it happen here? And the answer is, it can happen anywhere.
Did he claim any connection to ISIS?
All right, hold on. Right here in the front row.
Did he claim any connection to ISIS? There was a tweet.
He did make statements, but the question is, did he claim connection to ISIS? He did make statements, but we're not going to talk about that right now.
Is he from Brooklyn?
Right behind you. Hold on, right behind you.
Where exactly did the device go off in the passageway?
It's at 42 and 8. He's walking eastbound to 42 and 7. And so it's from this corner to Times Square underneath. If you've taken the subway, you know what the passageway I'm talking about.
Where is it?
All right, hold on. In the back? Yeah.
A subway system of this size runs 24 hours, 7 days a week. I know you say you've got it all covered. How does this possibly have it covered, given its size and scope?
All right. The question is, the size of the subway system is massive. How can we have that how can we have that system covered? Listen, this is going to take. There's 6 million people that ride the train every day. It's going to take everybody to have their eyes open, pay attention to what's going on. If you see something that makes you uncomfortable, make that phone call or talk to a cop. Give us a chance to investigate. Right in the back. We don't know. The question is, was it intentional, the spot where he detonated the explosive device? We don't know that yet. Right here, Miles.
Commissioner, I understand you search warrant in Brooklyn, and how far can they track the suspect?
Yeah, we're not going to. The question is that are we at different locations in Brooklyn? I'm not going to go into that right now. This is part of what we do. We're investigating his background now to see what addresses he have, and we'll fully investigate him in the locations where he lives. All right, listen, we're going to come back to you later on with some more information. Thank you very much.
All right, thank you, folks. Thank you, folks. We'll get you an update as things become available, all right? Thank you.
Police Commissioner James O'Neill. Police Commissioner James O'Neill wrapping up a press conference providing details on this attack on the Port Authority bus terminal this morning. Answered a few questions which were germane, including that we understand that there were 3 minor injuries to passengers who were surrounding the man who apparently detonated the device in a hallway. And he has injuries which were a bit more severe. He's identified as 27-year-old Akayed Ulo. He is from Bangladesh, believed to be living in Brooklyn. They described the pipe bomb as a low-tech device similar to a pipe bomb. The suspect had lacerations on his hands and serious injuries. And we're also told that the transit and the bomb squad responded very quickly to the incident. Very interestingly, Commissioner O'Neill was asked if the suspect said anything before the device went off, perhaps tipping his hand to whether or not he was a supporter of ISIS or any other terror group. And the commissioner responded, that's part of the investigation.
So we are awaiting a number of questions to be answered at this time, but we did hear that there were no other threats to the city, and that is very good news for so many people concerned that this may have been part of a broader plot. Of course, they will investigate further, but at this time, no other threats.
Right, we're going to pull away from the WCBS coverage of this bomb explosion, this attack, essentially. We can call it an attack on the Port Authority here in New York City. It happened at in the height of the rush hour, around 7:30 or so, in the pedestrian walkway underneath the Port Authority. What we know now is that a 20-year-old Bangladeshi man is in custody. His name is Akayed Ulo. He apparently detonated a bomb that was attached to his body. John Miller, NYPD Deputy Commissioner, said it was attached to his body using Velcro and zip ties. He also had an additional device with him. The bomb that exploded is described as a pipe bomb. And there's some speculation as to whether or not it was deliberately detonated or whether or not it was an accident. It is a very crowded, well-used pedestrian walkway, but it appears as if there's a possibility that he had not planned to detonate it at that time. The picture that you're looking at right there is the suspect on the floor shortly after the bomb detonated. You can see his shirt ripped apart. You can see burn marks on the fabric. He was injured in his abdomen, stomach area. His injuries are described as serious injuries. There were three other people who were also injured. This is video inside the pedestrian walkway right there. This is surveillance video. There you see the explosion, the dust clears, and you see the suspect on the ground right there. The three other people who were injured were other pedestrians walking in the pathway. Their injuries are described as minor, and they're injuries that are consistent with being close to an explosion, perhaps like ringing in the air or maybe minor burns, but they were injured only minorly. The suspect was taken to the hospital. Police say that he did speak to them, but they refused to disclose the details of what he had to say, whether or not he mentioned a connection or a motivation to a particular terrorist group or not. Police say that's part of the investigation. They're not going to talk about that. They're right now trying to determine what more they can about the suspect, about the weapon used, and what brought him to this point where he was exploding a bomb during the busy rush hour here in New York City. CBSN security analyst Paul Violas has been with us all morning long, and he's joining us now from his home via Skype. Thank you so much, Paul. So we know a little more information about the suspect here. We know that he's from Bangladesh. Police not telling us exactly how long he has been in the country. We know that he's just 20 years old. Certainly, those sort of basic descriptions are in line with others that we have seen participate in terrorist attacks here in this country. But also that the bombs seem to be attached with Velcro and zip ties. Do you think this suspect was intending to survive?
It doesn't appear so. It appears that what his intention wasn't really followed through with. And the police will know more about that once you have bomb squad and ordnance experts examine the composite of the vest and what was actually attached in the ordnance with respect to what was deployed and how it was deployed. At that point, we're going to know a lot more with regards to what he intended to do and when he intended to do it.
All right, so the investigation is well underway. Take us through it. There's going to be investigators at the scene looking for certain things, and it appears as if they are also tracking down his addresses and so on and so forth. Break it down for us, Paul.
Right, so take a look at it this way. I mean, the best way for our viewers to understand this is if you marker board this whole thing. Now, let's start with the crime scene and put that crime scene at the train station right in the middle. You've got a variety of different talent, law enforcement talent, that's going to be on scene. From the actual investigation to the crime scene investigation, then you'll also have ESU and you'll have the bomb squad. All of them will work together in analyzing the crime scene. Simultaneously, we know that, one, you've got the federal government that will be involved, from the Department of Homeland Security to Immigration's Customs Enforcement. We know he was from Bangladesh. They are right now, as we speak, conducting a very deep dive into this particular individual with regards to his citizenship or lack thereof, as well as how often he has traveled back and forth and where he went in the countries he's traveled to. So that's working at that point. Then you have the Joint Terrorism Task Force. You have the FBI working in concert with the New York City Police Department on examining who this individual is. Part of that investigation, Anne-Marie, is going to drive more to the individual, securing search warrants on the individual's home, his vehicle, if there was one, etc. And at that point, they're going to look to examine his phones, his devices, to see who he communicated with. Was he working with someone else? Doing more of a deeper dive into his computer, looking at websites he visited. Was this part of, and this will be telling Anne-Marie, was this part of a larger plan? Did he work in concert with someone else? Or was he actually just being educated over the internet, and did he deploy this himself? You also have, at that point, really have to take a look at the broader stroke on who he's associated with. All of these different things will come into this big intelligence pot. And the variety of individuals that we have working in collaboration with each other will be able to start identifying who he worked with, if he worked with anyone at all, where this ordinance came from, and then simultaneously married to the technology part of the investigation. And that's where you've got people like NYPD's Real-Time Crime Center. And they're going to examine, using artificial intelligence, they'll examine where this individual came from, track his camera footage to see if he associated with anybody else. Did he get in a vehicle? If so, what that plate was, etc. So you've got a variety of different things all going at once. But believe it or not, Anne-Marie, it sounds like a lot, but it's extremely well organized.
It does sound like a lot. Ron Hosko, you are joining us again on the phone. Ron, we've learned that the suspect in this case is from Bangladesh, and you know, the president has not tweeted yet, but certainly, you know, part of his argument for for his extreme vetting and limiting who can travel to this country has to do with stopping potential terrorists from entering this country. What do we know about Bangladesh and the vetting process that allows people to enter this country?
You know, Anne-Marie, it is it's not thought to be the hotbed, as we've seen from the president's prior immigration orders, some of which the Supreme Court just weighed in on last week and said, you know, go ahead with the sort of vetting that he had planned, at least on an interim basis. It's not one of those, you know, lawless hotbeds like we've seen appear in some of those orders. However, you know, extremism is around the globe today. And so you can anticipate that people who are inspired to hateful acts of extremism, like we are apparently learning about this morning, can come from anywhere. And it does require close vetting, and it is certainly a challenge for our immigration authorities, because so much of what happens overseas is very difficult to prove or disprove. And this is true of applicants for federal government positions too. It was certainly true for, you know, good people who were applying to positions within the FBI, that if your family ties and your travel in the past has so often been to dangerous parts of the globe, it's more difficult to find employment, because the background investigators can't prove or disprove what you're telling them. And that's true around the globe today, where our world is shrinking. International travel occurs, you know, hundreds and thousands of times every day and every week. And what you do in a foreign land is very often obscured from the view of others. And so it makes it easier to become a terrorist. It makes it easier to hide your true intentions, to conceal them. And I know that immigration authorities have recently, there's been a step up in what they're trying to do with respect to social media presence for people traveling in. And I think they should be doing that. But again, there are some limitations to that too. If you're engaged in social media in an account overseas, first, it's easy enough to set up a fake account and make your traffic on that account look completely innocuous, and really, in effect, to conceal some dark plan that you might be involved with or nefarious contacts that you have. So in our current world, it is very, very difficult to do. And even on their best day, immigration authorities may be tremendously challenged to see what looks like clearly a terrorist coming in that has to be stopped, or ideally we stop them before they get on a plane or some other transit coming to America. Right, indeed. I just want to point out that Bangladesh is not one of the 6 mostly Muslim countries on the president's travel ban. The young man, again, the suspect in this case from Bangladesh, he's 27 years old. I think I was saying he was 20 or in his 20s. We know now that he's 27 years old. DeMarco Morgan is down at the scene at the Port Authority and joining us now. DeMarco, what's it like there now?
Well, I can tell you this, Anne-Marie, Port Authority is now open, but this portion of Midtown is pretty much locked down, of course, because this is now a massive crime scene. But you can see behind me some of the officers who are heavily armed, and you have also National Guard, troops out here, FBI agents, a number of agencies who are now taking part in this investigation, which is standard procedure whenever something on this magnitude happens. I can also tell you that the train stations are back and operating, but they're bypassing the 42nd Street stop. You know, there are a number of trains for those of us who live here in New York City, those who have traveled here. It is a heavily train station there where tons of people get off because they're touring Times Square. But you also got to think about the mass of people who work in this area as well, who had trouble even trying to get to work. Some who still can't get to their offices because certain streets are closed. But we talked to some of the people who were in the area, not exactly in that area where the explosion happened, but it caused a number of people. It sort of sent a domino effect there, causing pedestrians to just take off running, those who didn't know what happened at the time. Traffic in most of the area here in Midtown is at a standstill. It's still like moving down your avenues here in some of your side streets, but in certain areas, again, we're now in gridlock, and that's because people are still trying to find out what happened, those who haven't been listening to the radio or the news and trying to understand what's going on here. But you have people who are trying to get to work, they can't get there, trying to figure out why something like this happened. And we also just finished listening to Governor Cuomo and also the mayor here, Bill de Blasio, mayor of New York City. And they were saying that, you know, this is New York. It's a target, unfortunately, for people who want to take a stand and do something against the democracy here that we so love, cherish, and the peace that we enjoy. But they said it's always important when you see something, say something. That was a message that they got the situation under control, but now the investigation is far from over.
Yeah, it's a slogan that we have heard over and over again here in the city. If you see something, say something. And every time something like this happens, the idea is reinforced that law enforcement can do only so much. They need the general public to also participate in this idea to keep us safe. DeMarco Morgan, thanks a lot. I want to show you that video again. In that pedestrian walkway, this is as the bomb explodes. The pedestrian walkway is filled with people trying to get to work. This is some sort of probably surveillance camera that's underneath there. Let's just take a look at this. This is the moment the bomb explodes. There you have it. You see that puff of smoke and the suspect on the floor there. Police say that he received burns to his abdomen and to his hands. The pipe bomb attached to his body with Velcro and zip ties. 3 other people were injured who were in the vicinity of the explosion. They received minor injuries that are consistent with being close to an explosion, like ringing of the ears. But as you can see, no one else is around him once the dust settles there. His injuries are being described as serious. He is a 27-year-old man from Bangladesh. His name is, excuse me as I go through my papers, Akayed Ulo, I believe, 27 years old. And according to the latest Wire copy, it says that he was inspired by the Islamic State and had apparently had no direct contact with the terror group, though they have determined that he was inspired by the Islamic State. Reporters asked authorities whether or not he said anything after the explosion. They said he did speak, but they were not going to reveal the details of what he had to say. Paul Viollis, you're standing by for us. So we're learning now that he was indeed inspired by the Islamic State, but did not have direct contact with the terror group, which means probably he was inspired by watching videos, something that he did at home. This is a particularly difficult suspect to nab before he embarks on an incident like this.
There's no question about that, Anne-Marie. And you know, what this is what you and I have talked about many times before in the past, and unfortunately I think we're going to talk about it more times in the future, is whether or not we're willing in our country right now to consider policing the internet and policing social media. It appears, and we don't know this for sure, and I don't want to say this because we don't know for sure, but what it appears to be right now is that he was inspired via the internet, via social media. We know for a fact that ISIS has done and continues to do an exemplary job at training and recruiting and executing plan, as well as examining the demographic they look to recruit off social media. So as we drill down on this, and investigators will, and rest assured that we have the very best in the business that will be examining this very thoroughly, we're going to probably find that he had a social media presence, especially when you look at his pedigree of 20 years old. It's highly unlikely he doesn't. So that's the part that we're really going to have to look at. And yes, is it difficult? It's very difficult. And absent our ability to closely examine social media dialogue, we're not going to get down the road here and be able to play ball one-on-one with ISIS because they have the advantage.
You know, Paul, you've brought this up. Ron, you've brought this up too, that in order to defeat this threat, it's going to take more than law enforcement and the intelligence community. Everyone else has to have a hand in this. And Paul, you know, you talked about the fact that this guy is he's 27 years old actually, and he probably has a social media background, social media accounts. Ron, are these websites, Facebook, Twitter, these other websites that I probably don't even know about, are they playing ball? Are they helping law enforcement with this problem? Are they cracking down on ISIS-related accounts? And are they keeping track of conversations that, you know, may be suspect?
You know, Anne-Marie, there has been reporting just within the last year that the media companies have been cracking down, that they have, you know, let's say Twitter, for example, has disabled hundreds, if not thousands of accounts that pop up. Certainly, you know, sites like YouTube as well, where it's easy to upload a video of a horrific acts. And so it's on those companies to police their own space and to take that sort of inflammatory video down, block the posters, and try to defeat this, the inspiration before it really is able to take hold and inspire others. And so I think there has been a degree of cooperation. Of course, as you know, there are challenges that are ongoing with discussions with the FBI about what is encrypted. Of course, that is a huge concern for the FBI. Apart from what's going on social media, the encryption of communications, where the FBI is essentially blind. The current director, in testimony just within the last few months, was talking about, I think, over 50% of devices that they have the lawful authority to look at and to examine where they can't get in because of encryption. That's a big concern for law enforcement. It is a growing concern for law enforcement, and we're going to see examples. I know we did in the horrific crime in Sutherland Springs, Texas, with the active shooter down there, where his phone was password protected, and law enforcement was struggling to get into that. There are going to be more and more examples, and I think it's one of those spaces where the tech companies are going to have to hear an outcry from American citizens. There is a very legitimate concern about how do you balance personal privacy, my desire, your desire to protect your device. I don't want my pictures being shared by millions of people, so I want to protect that. That's completely legitimate. But where do you strike the balance? And how do you give law enforcement the keys with the right authority to get into some of these devices? That is a concern. I've said here, I've said to others, that I think we're going to need a massive tragedy before the tech companies and Congress decide, hey, we really do need to have a conversation. Right now, we're talking about it, and nothing's getting done. But that conversation will happen. It will be amplified. It will be supercharged when we have a significant tragedy in America where law enforcement said, we knew the guy. We couldn't see the electrons. We couldn't see the communication.
Yeah, I think that's really interesting. I think the last time that conversation came up sort of nationally was with the San Bernardino shooters, who, of course, it was in December. They walked into a holiday Christmas party at work and began shooting. And after it was all over, investigators wanted to get into their iPhone, and they ran the risk of wiping it clean, I believe, if they kind of broke into it, and they wanted Apple to help. And it resulted in a legal battle in which Apple refused.
It did, and I think the FBI has been, and we've heard some of these comments from the current director. We've heard some of them from the Deputy Attorney General in some recent commentary, where we hear them raising it as a pressing concern, not just for the FBI, but for all of law enforcement. If you're talking about thousands of devices that the FBI can't get into, multiply that out exponentially for law enforcement that does not have the technical wherewithal or the contacts with the tech companies to try to enter these devices. So I think that battle is coming. We don't know today how it's going to play out. There's like many other things in our country, we have there's the national conversation on whatever. This is going to have to be somewhat of a national conversation on tech and on security and on encryption, and I don't think the conversation is effectively moving forward. It seems like it's stalemated with law enforcement trying to pick the ideal case. Perhaps this one today will be that case, and the tech companies essentially doing nothing because they're not being pushed. They're not being pushed hard enough. And so today there is no answer other than law enforcement is blocked from seeing that which they can lawfully see.
All right, Ron, thank you so much. Hang on. Paul, I want to get your take on what Ron had to say, but we're going to take a quick break first. We are covering essentially a terrorist attack at the Port Authority here in New York. Bomb explosion in the pedestrian walkway. A suspect is in custody after injuring himself with that bomb. 3 others injured, only minor injuries there. We're learning more about the suspect. We're learning more about what inspired him, and we're going to keep you posted and keep you up to speed. You're streaming CBSN.
Every FBI agent on this team is a specialist in criminal behavior.
Brace yourselves. We get into the mind of the killer because lives depend upon it.
Don't miss a moment of TV's #1